This is Doleo, an original thriller fiction podcast presented in serialized format, a chapter at a time. Written by Jared Canton, narrated by Joshua Canton, a Steady Chaos production. Previously on Doleo. Jermaine stood, hacked hard twice, stopped, and then started my way. I ducked back tightly to the wall and waited. A knot hurtled up my throat, a tightly wound ball of anxiety, and then backed down as I forced a swallow. A tingling sensation ascended the notches of my spine as if it were a staircase. I held my breath, lungs full, light-headed, almost dreamlike, as if my body wouldn't respond when I needed it most. This was the moment, and all I felt was fear. The very second I needed focus and readiness, the bravery and power to force change, and I just wanted to be home, safe, in familiar surroundings. Then I thought of Dad and Cindy, and all of the victims I cared for that had faced down the cause of that suffering, with more pain as their only reward. I remembered those that had lost everything, everyone, only to see a plea bargain of 7 years as their sole retribution. This wasn't just about covering my ass anymore, nor about legitimizing lies. This was an opportunity to matter. This was about becoming something that was certain, effective, absolute. I was no longer a bystander, or cog in a broken system. I was a man with a curse turned gift. Instead of telling young people like Cindy to stand up, I had the opportunity to assume that burden for myself. It was my time to act, not just ask someone else to. No more shifting of unspeakable burdens. Episode 18, Collateral Damage. Hands! A voice boomed from the adjacent rooftop. I peeked upwards, raising an eye above the bottom railing for a better view. Several flashlight beams trained on my position. Their blinding glow partially masked a small contingent of officers lined along the edge of the rooftop. I moaned and rolled back to my side, lungs still thirsting for breath. I heard another demand of some sort, and then gunshots. Crunching thuds ripped into the brick wall above my crumpled body, spitting rock fragments atop my head and neck. The municipal firing squad had been gracious enough to extend the courtesy of 2 commands, one of which had been indecipherable before interpreting my stillness as non-compliance. I had expected a stop order, yelling, maybe some posturing. What I hadn't expected was poison ivy level itchy trigger fingers. I took a beat to level set, recenter, where I was and what I was doing. What the hell was I doing? I deserved everything I was getting. This was my life now, and I had to deal with it. I grasped the whip chain and rolled a half rotation off the fire escape platform. I slipped invisibly into the night air, dropped maybe 30 feet, and landed hard in a dumpster packed with paper products and spoiled food. The landing was worlds better than the pavement just feet to the right, but it still jolted my system. I pulled frantically at white stuffed garbage bags, trying to wade through the sea of trash. Each time I pushed free of one bag, I'd reach for another, push it down, fall deeper until finally I reached the steel edge of the dumpster. I tugged at the thin metal perimeter of the basin with both hands, and dragged myself along the top of the heap until I toppled over the rail clumsily, crashing hard onto the pavement. Ugh. Some vigilante. To my right, the alley stretched until it ended perpendicular to the main street, where red and blue flashes illuminated building walls. Yells from the rooftop spread into the night, and a patter of boots grew near. A closer clunking sound startled me, and I looked to my left. The handle of Jermaine's knife still bobbed from my shoulder, perched firmly, except now it had picked up a cumbersome companion from the piles of trash. I scurried on my knees to the far side of the dumpster and backed up to it, creating a barrier between myself and the sound of boots. I wrestled with the empty, potent-smelling milk carton that had wedged itself onto the knife handle. It wobbled back and forth. On its side were the words, "Have you seen this boy?" Under the question was a picture and the name of Timothy Graves. I pulled the milk carton clear of the handle and inspected the wound quickly. I dared not remove the knife, as from the looks of things, it was doing a decent job limiting the blood loss. There was only moderate blood saturation around the wound, working its way outward, forming a slushy perimeter of blood-soaked fabric, framing the knife and wound. From my concealed corner, maybe 30 feet away, I heard the overburdened lungs of two of Boston's finest. I now realized I was more likely to be shot than detained, and not only by the police, there was a dead gangster's body caving in the hood of a Ford Taurus just a block away. The breathing quieted, as if the cops eased out of panic mode and into search mode. The clacks of their boots became quieter, further apart. It was then that I fully grasped the gravity of the situation. I was willing to take this role only so far. I was willing to do things that I wasn't necessarily proud of, but I wouldn't kill a cop. I wouldn't be the reason a father or mother didn't come home from work. Even if it meant the end of my life as I knew it, the end of both Doleo and Ryder, I would never kill a cop. A scratching, shuffling noise rose from the ground just behind the corner of the dumpster to my right, like a shoe on sand, a subtle warning shot. I reached for the handle of the whip chain and readied in my crouch, the dart steadied in my hand in a backwards grip. A cop lurched his foot into my sightline, pivoted to his left heel, and wheeled around the edge of the dumpster, his gun and flashlight aimed in my general direction. Before he could aim the gun with any certainty, I fired the steel dart backhanded, like a throwing dart. It drove hard between the middle and ring finger knuckle of his right hand. He screamed in agony as it split his knuckles, and the fierce pitch of his cries bounced off the brick building down the alley in a loose echo. I reared hard on the chain, and his arm jerked outward, his gun toppled to the ground, and his free hand grasped at his now bloodied and disfigured knuckles. "Jesus Christ!" he yelled as he buckled over before staggering back to the wall across the alley. His hands clasped tightly into his midsection, and a slow trickle of blood crept from his balled fists. "Freeze!" Another officer yelled up from the alley. I caught him in my peripheral vision and crouched back down behind the dumpster, recalling what had followed the last demand to stop. I drew my Glock, reluctantly, and only for leverage, and steadied it at the wounded cop across the alley. "Tell him," I growled. The officer complied, sheepishly. "Stay there," he said. He extended his good palm up, signaling the officer to stop. "Tell him to back off." The cop pushed at the air a few times. "No way!" the cop down the alley shouted. I squeezed off a suppressed round. The brick wall beside the wounded officer spat brick fragments at him. The cop ducked his face underneath a canopy of his own outstretched arms. "Back up!" he demanded more urgently. This time I could hear the slow shuffling of retreating feet. I stood to peek over the top of the dumpster, and to my dismay, the cop stood, no further away than before, shuffling his feet in place. A smirk gripped his face, and as everything around me slowed, silenced, I saw the officer perform two competing actions at once. Two actions that don't naturally occur simultaneously. He pulled the trigger and the gun jumped in his hand. A deafening crack smothered all other sounds, and then a split second later, another crack. The cop's shoulder jutted hard, throwing him off balance, and I heard a bullet whiz by my ear, high and wide by inches, maybe a foot. I froze in place, stunned, and another crack dropped down from above. This time, the officer fell back, hard. I looked up in time to see two shadows, large, high atop me in an apartment window. They say at times like these, the brain instinctively chooses fight or flight. Mine chose flight. As I ran down the alley, deep voices boomed high above.
"Get his ass! Track him down! Track him! Where is he? Track him down!"
And then the return of gunfire. An endless stream of shots cascaded down upon me as I ran. The bullets found earth, dirt, rocks, pavement, walls, everything exploding around me. But from what I could tell, none found me. I rounded a tight corner in a full run, and my inside foot slid along the dirt, failing under me. I slid hard into a new alley, and the gunfire stopped. I pushed myself up from the pavement with my palms, lifted my head, and the quiet of night returned momentarily. It quickly yielded to the low, throaty roar of an engine. Then, a pair of lights, like an interrogation lamp, lit me up. The instant transfer from dark to light confused my senses, and I averted my eyes. A second deep roar from the light's source repeated. One muscle car, one alley, and one fucked Doleo. Tires screamed as they whirled atop the pavement. Smoke, tinted pink in the taillights, expanded and rose, and the rear of the car shimmied left and right in a small rhythmic pattern. I glanced back, considered retreating towards the gunfire that had corralled me here, but neither that option nor the adjacent dead end appealed to my innate desire to remain alive. Shit. Begrudgingly, I took a small stride in the direction of the shuddering vehicle. The car pulled out of its whirling show of force and accelerated fast towards me. I ran now, fast, closing the gap on the muscle cars that gained speed towards me. 15 feet, then 10. The car roared up to 30, then at least 40 miles per hour. I pulled the Glock from its holster, jumped, and stomped my right foot down hard on the car's hood. I leapt, mistimed it, fell forward as I jumped over the car's roof, and dumped much of the near-capacity clip into the car's roof as I fell hard, bouncing off the trunk before eating pavement. My trigger finger twitched fast as I rolled to an ungraceful and probably terribly painful landing for most. The Glock clicked empty several times before I finally stopped panic hammering at the trigger. I rolled to my back, observed as the rear tires on the car locked, swinging the heavy chassis of the American muscle car 180 degrees around. The driver overbraked in his maneuver, and the car sideswiped the brick wall hard, and then stopped, again facing me, now at an imperfect angle. I was defenseless. The engine growled like a hungry predator, and the rev of the engine made the car's front bumper heave, and then relax before heaving again with a mechanical snarl. This time I didn't see the benefit in playing chicken. I got up, turned, and bolted out of the alley as if shot from a cannon. Now on the main street, I tried to place myself within foreign surroundings. I turned right, chest burning, and directed my gait back towards Germain's building. I was probably 4 blocks from where I had hidden the Ducati. I looked over my shoulder as I heard the car launch itself from the alley. The driver performed the same maneuver as before, swinging the car's rear end in a fishtail before straightening back out at its target. Me. The passenger door opened, and I observed in horror as I ran down the sidewalk. A lifeless body poured out the open door, replaced by a fresh man from the back seat of the car. Apparently, my flying gunman routine had been effective, to a degree. I watched as the door closed, and the passenger hung his upper body out the window, gun in one hand, the stability of the window in the other. I was a sitting duck, exposed on the vacant street. I veered right into the next alley and crouched as the car's roar bore down on my position. I grabbed the whip chain grip, felt my knuckles whiten under an anxious clench, and waited. The exhaust rumble neared. I readied. The car closed on my concealed position, and I swung the chain overhand hard at the man hanging from the passenger window, mistiming it early. I blundered, and the dart lurched into the car's open window, past the targeted gunman, and fastened itself into something firm inside the car. The gunman let out a scream and raised a small automatic in my direction. It was then that everything turned into a blur. The car braked, smoke rose from the tires, the scream of rubber on asphalt, and then of a human, and I braced myself, not sure what I had dug my weapon into. I grasped the grip with both hands, anchored my right leg forward as if prepping for a tug of war, and felt whatever I had fastened to give way. By the time I realized I had hooked the driver, he had been pulled out the passenger side window, taking his passenger with him, and saving me from a brutal death by Uzi. The 2 men spilled to the pavement, and then the idling car rolled slowly down the street past me, calmly, peacefully, empty. The driver was clearly dead. The dart had sliced clean through his neck, turned sideways on the other side, and like a barb on a fishhook, grabbed on. The chain had ripped through the backside of his neck, and his blood coated the ground encompassing his lifeless body. The passenger writhed on the ground, his arm twisted horrifically backwards, his left propped him off the ground. Knowing eyes glared up at me, well aware of the fate of their owner. "Are you Rodney Rhodes?" I barked at the defenseless man. He roughly fit the description, but it was too dark to be certain. I recalled Luttrell's description of the car involved in his brother's shooting, the growl it made as it sped away, leaving death and mourning in its wake. "Nah, man, I ain't Rodney." "Do me a favor." He nodded, fear and agony, and an arm that swung at its break, like the pendulum on a grandfather clock, had overridden his courage and loyalty to gang. A new set of police sirens landed shrill in my ears, too far to cause alarm after the truly close calls I had just survived. I stared down towards the man, past my shoulder, which somehow, someway, still held Germain's knife. "Tell Rodney that Doleo came looking for him." Okay, man," he murmured. His eyes darted back to his damaged arm. Terror flashed across his face. "And tell him I'm not done looking for him."
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed Doleo, please come back for future episodes arriving at regular intervals, and subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast application.